Rabbi Noah Whittenburg grew up on the East Coast in Portland, Maine, but his rabbinic career took him as far west across the country as you can go, to sunny San Diego, California, where he currently serves as the Assistant Rabbi at Beth Jacob Congregation. Rabbi Whittenburg wasn't sure exactly what he wanted to do after graduating from Rutgers University.
I was so indecisive, and my parents, bless their souls, were so patient with me. I had no clue what I wanted to do. But the one thing I kept thinking was, how can I do something that doesn't involve learning Torah?
What he found, though, was that the more he learned, the more he wanted to share it with other people, which eventually led to his decision to become a rabbi.
The most important thing I can do is not the drasha, it's not the shir I give. As much as I like to think it is, it's not. It's connecting with people, it's making relationships. And the more you connect with people, so then the more impact your drasha has in return.
In hindsight, it was such a natural fit for Rabbi Whittenburg, it's hard to conceive of him doing anything else. In this insightful episode, Rabbi Whittenburg shares his process for crafting drushas.
The best piece of advice I ever got, and probably it's the best piece of advice because I listened to it, was that you should always have an archive. So if I see something I like, it could be the middle of December for Parshas Bereshis. I'm going to scan it, take a picture of it, and put it into my archive in Google Drive.
His goals.
What I want is just you to see the rabbi as a relatable person who gets me. He gets my life, and he can tie the Torah to my life.
Rabbi Whittenburg also reveals the book that changed the way he tells stories. His philosophy of shorter is better.
The line I like to use is, I speak just short enough that people will listen.
And the different ways he measures the impact of his drushos.
There are people who come up to me every single week. Rabbi, that was amazing. I'm so glad you shared that message with me. And so I once said to my wife, they come up to me like every single week. And she said, yeah, but if they don't come up to you one week, you should be nervous.
As much as Rabbi Whittenburg loves to teach, he remains at heart a lifelong learner, which is evident from the way he approaches his drasha preparation. Although a consummate professional, he's flexible, solicits feedback, places a premium on practice, and is hyper-focused on growth. This was a fun and insightful interview, and I learned so much, as I hope you do too. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Rabbi Noah Whittenburg. I Googled your name, and this athlete popped up.
Snowboarder came up?
It's like skiing, but like with a parachute. It's really interesting.
Now I need to Google myself.
I'm surprised you didn't know that. So I'm like, this is going to be a really interesting interview. Not you.
No.
Okay. Well, you grew up in Maine, right? So tell
Yes.
me a little bit about the Jewish community in Maine.
It's a pretty humble Jewish community there in Maine. When my parents moved in 40 years ago, so it was a lot different. There was a butcher and there was an active shul. And now slowly those things have kind of gone away. The butcher was the first to go, obviously. The shul has since sold their building to a racquetball court. They rent out now from a conservative shul, like in the back room. And for a while, they would do every Shabbos, and then they would do every other Shabbos. And now they're pretty much doing Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and a few select Shabbosim during the year. It's not what it used to be. I one time met a Jew in Zichron Yaakov in Eretz Yisrael, who said that when he was in residency, so he was Choser B'Tshuva, and it was back in Portland, Maine, back when Portland, Maine had minyan 3 times a day. So it's not what it used to be, unfortunately.
I actually went to yeshiva in Zichron Yaakov for a couple 2.5 years. Yeah. And, so what do you attribute the decline to?
You need young families. If you don't have young families, shuls don't, the people who are there will stay and they'll die off, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So me and my sister are very representative of Maine in general, that my parents did not grow up there. They moved there, and we grew up there and we left. So that's pretty much what happens in Maine.
Yeah. Where did they move from?
Connecticut. My dad's a professor, so he wanted something tenure track. Got it.
The other Jewish geography link that I'll play is so I have a chavrusa. He was a student and he became a chavrusa. That's how sharp he is. He was an OSU student, and he is engaged to a girl from Roslyn. And you were the rabbinic intern in Roslyn. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What made you decide to become a rabbi?
It's a great question. And w when I think back to college and when I was deciding what was going to be after college, I was so indecisive. And my parents, bless their souls, were so patient with me. Had no clue what I wanted to do. But the one thing I kept thinking was, how can I do something that doesn't involve learning Torah? And so that was really the first step. I just wanted to continue to post Rutgers Learn Torah. And then I found that the more I learned and I started to teach, I really enjoyed that as well. I tell people the thing that I enjoy the most is teaching someone something that they don't know before. If I can lead you to whatever it is that you don't know before, that's the most exciting thing for me. And so I found that the more I learn things that people don't know, and the more I get to teach them things that they don't know, and I get to open their eyes to new things, and the more I enjoy it. So it's just like this everlasting cycle.
Yeah. So you identify as a teacher. You feel like you're that's your characteristic, overriding characteristic.
I like to think so, yeah.
Yeah. And so in terms of, obviously teaching and being a rabbi, there's other responsibilities besides being a teacher when you're a rabbi. And how did you slip into those? The pastoral side, let's say.
I think they come to me pretty naturally. I like people, so I enjoyed talking with them and connecting with them. But also, I've found, especially in this role, because being a rabbi of a shul, so I found, especially in this role, that the most important thing I can do is not the drasha, it's not the shir I give, as much as I like to think it is. It's not. It's connecting with people. It's making relationships, and the more you connect with people, so then the more impact your drasha has in return, the more people are going to listen to whatever your message is. And when you have to or want to give a less favorable message, so then they're going to come up to you also. I remember the first time, I don't like to use the word give musar, but I remember the first time I gave musar to my shul. It was the senior rabbi was away, and we on a Friday morning did not get minyan. I'm not sure if we were 8 or 9, but I had a whole drasha planned, and I was like, you know what, scrap this. I need to talk about this. This needs to be talked about. And I gave the drasha, and in it I said, I had a whole drasha planned, and this is what happens, and this is my impact, and I gave the message, and afterwards it was like everyone was like, that was amazing. I'm so glad you said that. It was awesome. And it was because I had strong relationships. I really think so. If it was my first Shabbos, they would have said, okay, we won't see you next Shabbos.
Right. So the fact that you had put in the hard work one-to-one with the individuals that comprise the audience, that made them more receptive to your message.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How often do you find yourself in that position of giving musar versus, let's say, inspiring or?
I try not to. I try not to. Um, I try to give messages of being growth oriented about that we can do more, but to say like we're doing something wrong, I think that was the only time I actually really said we're doing something wrong. We have to do something better. I've said a couple times, I've said many times that we can do more. We haven't reached our potential yet, and that's a message I like to give a lot, and I try not to give it too much about reaching your true potential, because I really think that people are capable of so much more than they give themselves credit for, and they need to be inspired to push themselves. But I really try to give a nice message, and as you kind of stated before about calls to action, I really also don't give so many calls to action. Sometimes I say we have to do this, and I'll give a practical example of what we have to do or a theoretical example of what we could do. But very often, I just try to give a nice idea, something that people can connect to and say, go home and sit at their Shabbos table and think like, oh, that was really nice. I enjoyed listening to that. And that way, when I give those calls to action or the musar, so then it'll be the rare time people won't be like, oh, he's doing this again, and they'll hopefully listen.
As the assistant rabbi, how often do you speak? How often do you give the drasha?
Really, honestly, depends on the time of the year. I'll probably give the drasha every 5 weeks or so, unless the rabbi is going, unless it's like Shabbos Yom Tov, then there's more, or unless the rabbi is gone for a couple weeks in a row, then it's more.
Let me ask you, where did you learn to speak? Where did you learn on the job? Where did you take homiletics at YU? It's part of smicha. Did you?
Yeah. So YU has homiletics. Well, YU has public speaking and homiletics. So I took public speaking one, two, and three, and then also homiletics. And I know it gave me a base for everything I do, but I think everything I do is very different than how I was taught it.
Yeah, can you give me some examples?
Yeah. I was in homiletics, the rule was that you wrote out your entire drasha, and it had to be in like size 20 font in order to make sure that you could see it. One time I messed up on something, and the rabbi teaching homiletics took my paper. He's like, the font's big enough. Practice more next time. So like that was the style. And I'm very big on having everything laid out because mentally for me, in order to go from beginning to middle to end, I need to have laid it out previously, but I don't do it like that. I do it in bullet points. I have like a bullet point paragraph for my intro and my middle and my end. And that way it's on the paper, it's in front of me if I need it, but I really try to get off the paper if I can. I try to add in things that come to my mind. I try to speak more freely. I used to my first year, I spoke off the paper. If it wasn't on the paper, I didn't say it. But I don't think that's the best thing. I don't think it sounds as natural. You want to feel like you're having a conversation with every single person in the room. And most conversations are not had off of a piece of paper.
Right. You're saying you're not as present when you're tied to the paper.
Yeah, you're always like looking down. I want to be like looking around and
Yeah.
finding people and getting and judging their reactions and going from there.
Right. Being in tune with the audience. Let me ask you something because this is something I'm so curious about. Is I see you put out the weekly video boards. They're really great ideas. Often very things I haven't heard of, which I guess you're successful in the sense that you're conveying Torah that I haven't heard of. Um, don't take this the wrong way, because I just want to know. It almost looks like you're reading off a teleprompter.
Uh,
I can't tell if you have something in front of you, but you're looking directly at it. There's pauses as if there's people in front of you. You have the hand inflections and everything. Is it just very rehearsed, or are you just in the zone when you're talking and it's without the notes and that's how you talk?
that so there's no teleprompter. Although I thought about it once. You can get them, they go over the screen of a thing.
Yeah,
Um, and I wouldn't call it necessarily very rehearsed. It's just for whatever reason, and this is my perfectionist self, for if it's a minute and a half video for it, it has to be crisp. It has to be crisp. I actually got the idea from when I was in the YU Torah Museum in Chicago. They would do like a 2 minute Torah, they call it, a weekly video board. And if you look at those videos, so I have a lot more mistakes in them because they wouldn't let you re-record. So when it's just me in my living room, I get to re-record when I want to. And I've thought about it. This is not what you're asking, but it's something I've thought about a lot. That maybe I should leave the ums and the ahs and the stutters in there. I don't, but I think about it a lot.
yeah, yeah. It's very professional looking. I mean, it's a nice background. You have the whole Sfarim, in the background, and it
Yeah,
looks
those aren't
great.
real. It's just no, they're real.
Green screen. Yeah. Okay. So tell me. So you have the video boards that you do every week, even though you may not speak every week. So
Mm.
how do you decide a what you're going to speak about in the video board, and b what's going to be in the drasha when it comes down the pike? Where do you source from, and how do you decide what's just for a short video board versus a full blown drasha? Walk me through that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think there's been one time where I've given a video for it and I've ended and said I could make a drush out of that. That could be 10, 12 minutes. I can make a drush out of that. But typically it's just a short idea where I think I can give you everything you need in the minute and a half, 2 minutes. I take from everywhere. The best piece of advice I ever got, and probably it's the best piece of advice because I listened to it, was that you should always have an archive. So if I see something I like, it could be the middle of December for Parshas Bereshis. I'm going to scan it, take a picture of it, and put it into my archive in Google Drive. And that way I always have it. So the first thing I do when I go to make a video board is I open up my archive and I say, okay, what do I have? And then I look through it. If I think, no, this is too complex, I'm gonna have to flesh this out. I need 10, 12 minutes to really give this over properly. So then I'll save that one day. Maybe I'll use it in a drasha. But if I think, okay, this is a short idea, it's going to tell you something you've never heard before, and it's going to give you some perspective. So then that becomes my video for it.
Mhm.
Rarely do I say, okay, I have a message I need to give, and I'm going to find something to do it. Typically, I find the idea and then I craft the message around it.
Got it. Got it. And so for a drasha, what's the goal for a drasha? What's your goal? What do you hope to accomplish with that slot? You have the entire kihila in front of you, and it's prime time, and all eyes are on you, and it's time to get the message across. What do you hope to achieve?
I think every drasha has a different goal, but common goals are to teach Torah. Sometimes I'll throw in an extra opinion just because, you should know what Rashi says, even though I'm going to tell you what the Ramban says. You should know what Rashi says. So that comes up a lot. Sometimes it's like we said, a call to action. Okay, this is what we have to do, whether as individuals or as a community. This is a mindset we need to try to adopt, something like that. I gave a whole drush on just feeling like we have the best community in the world, because it's an important thing. You can look and see what other people have, but we gotta see how we have such amazing things. So that's sometimes like the call to action, and sometimes what I want is just to see the rabbi as a relatable person who gets me. He gets my life, and he can tie the Torah to my life. So I'll give a message, something about like an experience we go through and how the Torah teaches us how we can manage that experience or manage those emotions. And even whether or not I think that you're going to take it home and use it practically, but at least the rabbi, he sees me. The rabbi is not just some figure who's up on the stage and like he doesn't get me and we don't connect at all. He sees me and he's able to connect the Torah to my life.
Got it. So you mentioned that you usually find the idea first, and then you try to tie a message to it. What counts as a good idea? Meaning, there's lots of vorts, there's lots of ideas, and you said even in video vorts, rarely do they make it into the drasha. What are you looking for? How do you know when you found something?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the answer I would give is, or I am going to give, is something that I connect to. If I'm like, oh, wow, that's a great idea. I really like that idea. So then that's what makes it. And it means that you leave a lot on the cutting room floor because there's so many ideas out there that somebody else connected to, that's just not for you. But I'm very passionate about that you have to connect to the idea, even if you don't think it's the best drasha ever. They're not all going to be the best drasha ever. That's what makes the best drasha ever. But it has to be something that you connect to and you think, oh, that's a good idea, and I'm excited to say this idea. Um, Someone once told me that in Rabbi Fran's shear room, there's a whole wall of Parsha Svarim. And someone said, so what are these Svarim? And he said, these are the ones that didn't make it. These are the ones that they have ideas in them that he didn't connect to. And
Mhm.
so he leaves them there, but he chooses from somewhere else.
Yeah. So you mentioned about like a beginning, a middle, and then tell me about your structure. Tell me how you try to structure a drasha.
I always try to structure it differently. That's something I'm very conscious of. There's a model that I like to use because it's the most intriguing, where you talk about one thing, you talk about another thing, they have nothing to do with each other, and then you connect them.
Oh,
That's my favorite.
the famous
The
H.
H.
Yeah.
The H. But I try not to use the H model so much, because if you use it too much, so then you everyone's gonna be like, okay, question one, question two, we got it. I always want to keep people guessing. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll start with a story, especially around Yom Tov time. I don't know why, but I like to start with stories then, and stories that I find anywhere. I like to read. I like to read those like pop psychology books, and they're filled with great vignettes. So I'll always scan them, and they're in my archives, and I come back to the stories all the time. So sometimes I'll start with a story, and then I'll interweave the message. Sometimes I'll start with like a study or something like that, um, and then I'll get show how it connects and try to pull them all together at the end. So I guess those are my two big ones. The H and starting with something, some sort of story, and then going into the question and then answering the question and showing how it all connects at the end.
Can you point to a single message that you are trying to convey with every drasha, or is it sometimes more than one message? Or how do you what's your mindset when you're trying to give over the drasha? Are you trying to give over a specific thing, or is it more of an experience, of a Torah learning, shared Torah learning together?
My goal is always one message, and I always try to have a concluding paragraph. I always try to, without saying, and we said this, we said X, Y, Z, but I always try to, in the last line, just kind of capture what it is I was trying to say so that when people go home and they say, what did the rabbi talk about? Hopefully they'll have one line that captures what you're trying to say. Because tafasa, miruba, lo tafasa. Try to say too much, you're not going to say anything at all. So I really try very hard to stick with one message. And it's a pet peeve of mine when people start going off in different directions and they start trying to give multiple answers and you need one message. People can't handle that. If people go home and they say, I don't know what the rabbi said, he said a lot of things, it wasn't a good drasha, in my opinion.
Yeah. And who do you admire? Who have been some of your role models or inspiration for the way that you speak? Or at least that you admire their speaking, even if you don't speak the same way. Who do you like?
Well, thanks to YU, I've learned a lot from Rav JJ Schachter. In multiple occasions, he has taught us. He's not only given us content of what to put into the drasha, but he's given us ways to speak. He has great lines that people repeat over and over again about what not to say. Never start with "it says" in this week's parsha. It's a big yesod. Rabbi Menachem Penner, I've learned a lot from also through YU. I really enjoy listening to Rashai Schechter. His speaking is very, very enjoyable. I can't say that I always model myself after him, but I am attracted to the fact that he's always coming up with something new and something you wouldn't expect. He'll be talking about the parsha, and all of a sudden he's talking about a tshuva and how it relates. It's the same message. So I try to use elements of that from time to time where I want to throw you off by adding in something that you're like, okay, what does this have to do with anything? And if I can tie it back in, which is the goal, so then it hopefully will stick with you a lot longer.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you're really adept at managing audience attention. It sounds like that, that they may get distracted. You kind of have to stay one step ahead of them, but, and kind of steer them and keep them guessing. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
really,
it's funny you say that because I gave like between Mincha Maariv on Sukkot on Simchas Torah, I gave a thing, and it was about where does the name Simchas Torah come from? Like, what's the Simcha of Simchas Torah? It's a great piece by Rav Shimon Schwab. And so anyway, someone came up to me afterwards, and I told him I was like, I always like to stay one step ahead of my audience. I was like, but I felt like the whole time you were one step ahead of me. He was a very smart guy.
yeah. Yeah. Amazing. So let me ask you a couple other questions about, let's say, personal details about yourself. How much do you share when you speak? Do you share, maybe struggles or challenges that you're experiencing and try to help people grow from them as a role model, or do you kind of leave that out of the sermons?
Sure. I'm of the philosophy I'm a big sharer. I'll say not anything, obviously, but I'll share a lot because I think it's important to be a human being. It gets back to, the rabbi gets me and he connects with me and he understands me, that I'm a human being too. And so I've experienced many of the things other people have experienced, and I will tell my personal stories. I'm very willing to tell my personal stories. And it's funny because growing up, like I said, my father's a professor, and he would tell a lot of personal stories about me in the classroom. And I remember at one point, I was probably 10, 12, thinking like, who gave him permission to tell personal stories about me in the classroom? But I guess I'm guilty of the same thing.
So you talk about your family.
Sometimes.
Yeah. And how do they relate to that? Are they okay with that, or do they?
Well, my kids are too young to protest, and my wife is, I think, okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Meaning, you talk about your wife?
Sometimes, yeah. Most rarely her alone, mostly us in as a couple.
as a unit. Got it.
Mhm.
Got it. Yeah, I remember sometimes I talk about my wife and she'd kind of like slink down in her seat and like everybody be looking at her, you know. So we try to limit how much I do with that. Um, what I, what else I want to ask you was I noticed when you do the video board, so you have very pronounced hand gestures. Is that something that is that tell me about that. Is that intentional? Do you do it for effect? Is it
I try to not do it too much.
mhm.
People have pointed out that exactly what you're pointing out, that I use my hands a lot. Um, I think it's an awkward feeling thing. Otherwise, what are you going to do with your hands? Um, Especially in a video for it, especially when it's just you and a camera and a bookshelf behind you. And so sometimes I'll redo, like I said, I get to hit the record button. So sometimes I'll redo it just because I'll say to myself, no, I used my hands too early on that one. I gotta keep the hands a little bit more quiet and then I'll use my hands. But really, I try not to think about it because if I'm focusing on my hands, then the
Yeah,
rest is
yeah, you're
good.
finished. Yeah. Um, what else I wanted to ask you about was storytelling. Do you have a any specific? You said you look to pop psychology books and stuff like that. Where else do you look? What other resources do you use for stories?
Um, Sometimes I'll try to use like personal stories if I think it relates. Obviously, if we're talking about if the message of the drush is, I don't know, it's Sidkus or something like that, it's not gonna be a personal story. But if it relates, I'll use a personal story. Um, or I have a friend who's not in the pulpit. He's a Rebbe, but he's a great resource in that I can tell him, okay, this is what I want to speak about. This is like the Vort. Like, what do you have to say about it? And he comes up with stories all the time. I don't know where he gets his stories from, but it doesn't matter to me. They're great stories.
Oh wow, love to talk to him. Yeah. So do you have a specific way that you tell a story? Do you try to because sometimes you'll find that when you try to give over, especially if it's not a personal story, it's just a story you heard or something. Sometimes it fizzles out, and you get the feeling like, well, I guess you had to be there. It just doesn't go anywhere. So what's your approach to storytelling? How do you manage that?
There's a book called Storyworthy by an author, Matthew Dix, if you've ever heard of it.
Never, no,
So he's big on the moth. The moth is like those storytellers, and it's funny. I've watched a number of his stories, and it's kind of like a drasha. You're not allowed notes. You get 10 minutes. You get graded on how well you did. It's very much so like a drasha, and it's a great book. And I think reading that book really changed the way I tell stories because he has some really important tips in there. Like start in the middle of the story. So many times I think what you're talking about is we start at the beginning of the story and I was sitting on my couch at home and it was Sunday and it was 9 o'clock in the morning and I was like, what am I going to do? Start in the middle of the story. Let's start with the action. We don't need all those boring details at the beginning. And always, whenever you're telling a story, he said to always place the people somewhere. I remember last Pesach, I told a story and it was the least important part of the story was this rabbi was going to be asked to go to I think Denmark it was and go on a boat with immigrants back to America. And so that was the least important part of the story. But I started it in his office in the Bronx on what November morning. And so now you don't have to know this guy, but you're picturing an office, you're picturing the Bronx, you're picturing a cold morning. I've put a picture in your head. And that's like the most important thing. You have to have a picture in somebody's head. And the last tip, and I thought this was the most important tip, is perspective. Think about the perspective that you're giving to the story. There's a story that this Matthew Dix tells where it's all about how he was out of money and he faked being someone raising money for charity in order to get $20 to put gas in his car to go home. And an incredible story. I listened to it again last week. It's just an incredible story. And sometimes I like to think about that in his book, he tells you that in the story that he picked up a hitchhiker. So there's a hitchhiker who's with him the whole time. And he said, but as soon as you bring the hitchhiker into the story, you're no longer driving the car and asking for charity. You're in the passenger seat looking out the window thinking, okay, what's going to happen? So it's all about if you put in too many details, whether they be the boring details or the unnecessary details, it kind of pulls you away from the main part of the story.
Wow, that's amazing. Wow, that's worth the price of this interview alone. I got to go check that out. Yeah, that's exciting. Um, do you move around at all? Do you stand behind the pulpit, or do you do any movement when you're giving a drasha?
I've started to move a little because people wanted me to move a little, but I don't think it's always so necessary. It depends. When I was like interning, I interned at a place where you couldn't move. If you moved, you fell off the pulpit. And then in Chicago, I would speak often at a show where you couldn't move. If you moved, you fell off the pulpit. So I was very much so trained to stand still. And I don't think that moving helps so much. It's kind of like the hand gestures that if you start thinking about moving too much, then it's not, you're going to forget your content. And if you don't think about moving enough, then you're going to look like you're lost and you can't remember which 6 inches you should be standing in.
Hmm. Do you speak at all over Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur? Do you?
Not yet.
Mhm. Do you sometimes feel like you'd want to, like you have what to say and you wish you can kind of get a crack
I
at
would
it?
yeah, I'd love to, but it's a one minion show.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, what else I wanted to ask you was about attention spans. Is how do you say that you're kind of hyper tuned to see the people in front of you, you want to be present. What do you do when you see people kind of start zoning out or looking around or looking down at maybe a parsha sheet or something like that? Do you kind of does it stare you? Do you try to get them back on track? What goes through your head when you see that? Because I mean it's inevitable.
Yeah, I'll try a little bit. Depend, it's part of knowing your audience that if I know who it is and they should be paying attention to me and they're not paying attention to me, so then okay, now I need to do something. But there are some people who will always be reading something no matter what. It doesn't matter who's speaking, they're always going to do it. And also, yeah, there is some inevitableness to it. You can try to be 100% effective, with every single person, but it's not necessarily the reality. And so I try to be as provocative is not the word. I try to capture people's attention as much as I can from the get-go so that hopefully I have them for the rest of the time. But if I don't, or if they don't necessarily want to hear the rabbi give a drasha, so then that's a reality. One of the things that I like about a drasha is that it's a challenge. It's a captive audience, except for the people who walk out. But it's a captive audience. Whether people enjoy that a rabbi gives a drasha or not, they're in the room. And so my job is to make it as enjoyable experience as possible. And so I try to do it as quickly as possible, and that way they're with me, but you can't get them all.
Yeah. How long is a typical drasha for you?
I speak 10 minutes or less. I speak probably eight to 10 minutes is a typical drasha for me. Um, the line I like to use is I speak just short enough that people will listen.
Got it. And how much time goes into a 8 to 10 minute drasha? How much prep time?
Hours. Hours. In high school, I was never good at writing and revising, but I write and revise my drashos. I have to have words on paper by Wednesday. I have to. Tuesday would be better, and that way I can start revising it because I want to put a laptop on a shender, act like there's an audience in front of me, say out the drasha, tweak different things, look for the details in my stories that are unnecessary, make sure that I'm starting in the right place, make sure that I have a concrete message. So I try to kind of just write. I don't think so much about what exactly I'm writing. Make sure it's structured correctly, but I don't, am I using the H model? Am I going to use a different model? But I don't try to, I'm not so precise on every single word. And then when I go back through it the second, third, fourth time sometimes, so then that's when I try to edit it. And at a certain point, I want to practice a finished product also. So at a certain point, I decide it could be better. It could always be better, but this is what I'm going with. And I'm going to practice that.
Do you collaborate with anybody, or is this do you do this in a vacuum?
Um, well, so I have the friends, the Rebbe, who I go to for my stories. And sometimes he'll look over my stuff, but he's also a busy person. He's not paid to edit my stuff all day. But for the most part, it's just me. After that, it's just me.
Got it. And you mentioned a couple times that you got feedback about, let's say, maybe the way you use your hands or other aspects of your drasha. Um, how does that work? Just people come up to you afterwards and just feel free to just
Oh,
give their
people
own
always feel
opinion.
free. Yeah.
um, what's the best feedback you ever got? What made you really feel like you reached them, you hit it out of the park, and it might not be just feedback that someone said something to you afterwards, but maybe maybe somebody took an action as a result of something that you did.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I appreciate it. Well, so I'll say two things. Number one is there are people who come up to me every single week. Rabbi, that was amazing. I'm so glad you shared that message with me. And so I once said to my wife, they come up to me like every single week. And she said, yeah, but if they don't come up to you one week, you should be nervous. But there's one person who I gave that drasha about coming to Shul, about the minion. And it's 2 years later, 2 years, yeah, it's 2 years later. And he comes to Shul for Mincha Mariv once a week, every single week. He has made a promise, bli neder, that he's going to come to Shul once a week, every single week. And he said it's all because of that drasha. And if you get one person to make a change like that, that's a huge compliment. That is a lot of success. And sometimes he'll remind me that he comes because of that drasha, and he likes to say, "See, sometimes I listen to you."
Yeah, I saw online somewhere there was some charity campaign where someone donated, maybe it was a student or something. Someone donated some money and said, "In honor of Rabbi Whittenburg, who uh, inspired me to keep more mitzvos," or something like that.
Oh,
And
I think I know who that was.
what's that?
I think I know who that was.
Yeah,
I've yeah, since I've been in Chicago, there's someone I learn with every single week. And thank God I've seen he's grown every single week.
yeah, that's very fulfilling. So what about some of the worst feedback that you ever got? Something that sticks out that still kind of stings. Uh,
When I was an intern, when I was an intern, someone came up to me and they said, Rabbi, you're great. You're gonna have a long, successful career, but if you don't start smiling when you give a drasha, I'm gonna stop listening. And I was like, whoa, I was really blown away by that. I was young. I was young. I had very little experience. I was just trying to focus on getting the words out of my mouth. And so I guess I was a little too concentrated. And so I think about that. I think about that a lot, trying to be a human being, have my full emotions when I'm up there. When I'm happy, I'm happy. And when I'm serious, I'm serious.
yeah. What what are some areas that you would say you still struggle with in terms of the drasha or public speaking in general? What areas would you like to see yourself improve in?
I have made huge strides in just slowing down. I naturally talk very, very fast, very, very quickly. And so I've made huge strides in slowing down. Last year, I brought in Rashai Schechter as scholar in residence, and it was very exciting. And I was not prepared to be the one to introduce him. And so Friday night at the Oneg, I introduced him, and I'm not even sure what I said. I know what I had in my head, and I don't think it came out as coherent. And so the next morning, when I went to introduce him for the whole show, when he was going to speak after Kiddush before lunch, so the rabbi said to me, just slow down. And it helps because if you give yourself a moment to think of the next word, so it comes out a lot better. And I don't think you feel like you're talking so slowly, but people don't see it as you're talking so slowly. You're just talking.
Yeah. Do you ever have something prepared? And I think maybe it referenced this earlier in the talk, but um, when you get to shul, you're just like, I'm not giving the regular speech today. I got to give something else. Something else has got to, something else is there's a burden on my chest that I have to get off. We talked about minyan, but any other times like that?
Yeah, I don't work that way. I really don't work that way. I gotta go with what's on the paper. I gotta be fully committed to it. But what I do is I'm I have no problem getting halfway through a drasha and throwing it out. It's that's totally fine by me. To say like to start the idea and try to develop it and say like this is not it's not going the way I want it to. This is not going to be the drasha I want it to be, and throw it out. It doesn't mean it's not a good idea. It doesn't mean I can't use it another year. But if it's not working for me at that time on that week, throw it out. I can write an entire drasha and throw it out. I have no problem with that. If I don't connect to it, then it's not what I'm going to give.
One thing I noticed that you have some amazing topics. I mean, I was just going through some of your topics in YU Torah and some of I think you had some printed up like Shoel Meshav things where you respond to ideas like, can you address a neighbor's dog named Zeus because it's the name of an avodah zarah, and you've got some fantastic stories. I remember listening to one of your lectures on YU where we were talking about the story about the Lavush, how the Sefer the Lavush, how he got his name. And you have some really esoteric, interesting things. Like, where do you find all these things? And do you narrow focus looking for the most interesting type of thing that you can find? Is that a pursuit?
No, I think my methodology when it comes to these things is I really just try to learn. There's things I learn every single day. Like every single day after davening, I go and I do more than 3 minutes a day. But I go through this because it's a good chazara of anything I learned in smicha, and I go through. I'm currently learning Shmuel Aleph, so and I go through all the footnotes. So you just find things if you're like learning, and then at home I learn so much Gemara every day, and I try to learn a little Mussar every day. I try to fit things in. If it's important to you, you'll fit it in. And so I try to fit things in. I try to do a page or two of whatever it is, because over time those build up, and you just find things. And every time I find something, I store it away, and I'll go through my archives and I'll see the things I've stored away, and I'll be like, oh, that's really good. I should use that. Um, I was recently there was a bar mitzvah in the show, and I was learning about the halachos when you're chovel someone, you injure them. So in there's a discussion about cutting if they're not bar mitzvah yet. So what do we make them pay for the damage? Do we not make them pay for the damage? And there's a Mishnah Berurah that we make them pay a token amount. You don't make them pay the full nezek, but you make them pay a token amount. So I was able to use that, and I had a whole nice idea about it, about how we're teaching the child responsibility, and how it happens to be these parents are very involved in the show through their actions. So they show what it means to be responsible for something. And so their child, I have no doubts, no worries that he's going to grow up to be someone who's going to take responsibility for the community, just like his parents, just like his grandparents. So you come upon things, you find things, and the more you learn, the more you find. Biography is I mean the story of the Lavush, I think I heard someone else say it. I teach in the high school, and sometimes I'll go through these biographies and these stories and these different things, and I've been asked so many times, do you just sit down and memorize these things? And I said, no. And someone else tells the story and I find it interesting, I store it away. And so then when I'm talking about these people and I want to give you context, so I'll bring up the story. All these people, the Pnei Yoshua and his Hakdama, that he was under, his house was on fire and he was under it. And he promised that he was going to commit himself to writing a commentary on the Gemara. All these people, these are very interesting stories, and they bring the Sfarim to life if you tell them.
Yeah. Someone told me, I can't remember who it was, but they have a chavrusa where they go through Hagdamas of Sfarim together. And
Sounds like a YU thing.
yeah,
Rav J.J. Schachter is very big in Hakdamas. He gives a lot of this stuff over.
What advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out, in their speaking career? Um, and they want to connect with people, they want to reach people, they want to transform people, educate people. Obviously, what kind of advice do you feel like you would impart to them? Let's say two pieces of advice.
Two pieces. Well, the thing that came to mind first was a piece of advice someone gave me, and that is listen to yourself speak. Because when you're in the moment, you don't necessarily know what's happening or what's not happening, what you said, what you didn't say, how you said it, but listen to yourself speak. And I always say at first it's going to be painful. You're not going to enjoy it, but you'll learn a lot from it. And hopefully over time, you won't make the same mistakes and you'll get better just by giving yourself feedback. That's number one. And number two, I think, is to have someone you can bounce ideas off of. That's been so incredibly helpful for me, to have a friend that I can go to and I can speak stuff out with. Because as much as you want to say, okay, I'm going to come up with my own stuff and I'm going to make it great, I'm going to make it amazing, two heads are always better than one. That's why we learn bichavrusa. That's why we learn with someone else, because someone's going to see something the way you don't see it, and they're going to float an idea by you. And you always have veto power. You always have veto power. I all the time tell my friend, thank you, but no thank you. Or I'll take parts of what he suggests. But he's always coming up with things that I would never have thought of, and I didn't know before. And it really makes my drushos and makes my shiurim a lot better. So,
yeah.
But I did think of the one thing I would add is, because you said about the hands a couple of times. So when nobody's ever been so harsh to say, if you don't quiet down your hands, they're going to stop listening. It just happens to be the way I speak. And there was one time someone gave me the advice and I was like, oh gosh, okay, I gotta be much more calm with my hands. But I didn't think my speeches were as good. I didn't think I had the same passion. I didn't think I was showing the same emotion. And so one day I decided, like, whatever my hands do, my hands do. That's how I speak. I'm not hurting anyone. This is my genuine self. And I think I'm a more attractive speaker when I speak the way I am. So I guess we could say that's also a piece of advice I like to give people, is just be yourself. If you work your whole life to be the next Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, so then you're never going to be as good as you are because you're working to be someone else. Whatever, insert speaker here. You're never going to be as good as you could be because you're working to be someone else. So just be as genuine as you can. Your speaking style is your speaking style, even if it means you say a few more ums and ahs than other people do. There are plenty of great speakers who and ah, but the thing that people are attracted to is they are the best versions of themselves, or they're getting to be the best versions of themselves. And that's a very attractive thing to people. So if you're just genuine and passionate, even if your hands are a little too whatever, people enjoy it just as much.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was really, really good. You reminded me of a guy that I knew. He's a rabbi, and I think I counted maybe 100 ums in the span of like 5 minutes, and it was so painful to listen to. But he was the only rabbi of the shul that shul ever. He's still a rabbi. He's been maybe 30 years, and the shul loves him. I mean, loves him because sure, there's room for professional development. You can polish yourself up a little bit, but there's no doubt in the shul's mind that he would like run through walls for anybody, and like you said, it's the drush is one slice of the entire pie,
Right.
but most of the work is done one-to-one and standing up for the community. And so, all right, so he is who he is, and there's a lot of ums and ahs, and he's a bit awkward, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, as long as you have that long-term relationship, you're both in it for the long haul, and got each other's backs, and that's really what's important. So,
Right.
All right, thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much.
Great work. Okay, this was really enjoyable. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Maggid Method, and I'm Daniel Steinberg. There's a secret that great public speakers know. Did you know there's a method for cutting straight through to an audience's heart, grabbing their attention and holding it, and making a memorable impact with your presentation? The best speakers in the world utilize it, and now you can too, every time you get up to speak. Download your free Maggid Method of Public Speaking template at maggidmethod.com, maggidmethod.com. The Maggid method will teach you how to find your authentic voice, craft meaningful presentations, manage people's attention, and build unbreakable bonds with your audience. Go to maggidmethod.com and download your free copy now.